Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 2 of Live Coding with AI. My name is Jardin. I'm from Bleeding Code, and I'm going to be discussing a couple of lessons that I learned from having a massive discussion with Google Bard and ChatGPT, trying to create a pretty advanced JavaScript function that's going to give me what I needed. So, this is episode 2 of Live Coding with AI. This is all about React.js, Node.js, JavaScript, integrations, and all those kind of tools. That's what I really focus on. And this is sort of me coding live. Not much of this is planned. I go with the flow on this. So if I need to troubleshoot something, we're going to be troubleshooting it. And that's the joys of code streaming, right? So I hope everyone enjoys this. Just to give you some context, in my first episode, which I recorded or went live with a couple of hours ago, I wanted to create a randomized function, but unlike a typical randomized function, it had to have certain conditions and certain abilities, allowing me to reuse that same randomized function all over the place and not have to keep on trying to say, okay, well, now I need to randomize and do this. Now I need a different randomize to do that. I wanted sort of something that was out of the box. I put it on CodePen. So if you go to codepen.io /bleeding codepen.io /bleeding code, you'll be able to see all the pens that I'm currently using or that I've created, and you'll see the one that says JS get random value. This is currently a work in progress. You'll see the checkboxes over here. Oh, what am I doing? You can't see anything, can you? Oh, my bad. So don't worry, I'll maximize this. Let's just quickly go again. So on top over here, you'll see codepen.io /bleeding code. And then here's the checkboxes that I was talking about, where these items have already been done. The information items needed to be testing, and defensive testing I haven't really done yet because I want to create a number of test cases. But here's my randomized code, and I used AI to help me build this code as well as test it and create all the necessary conditions. It wasn't as easy as what I thought it would be and what a lot of people end up thinking it is. But with a little bit of practice, I started getting to a point where it was becoming a lot more valid, like the kind of things that it was producing for me were becoming more and more legit and more stable. But I had to learn how to speak to AI. And even though I thought I could understand, or even though I thought I could provide the necessary contexts for most of the questions that I had and most of the tasks that I wanted AI to perform, I did hit a couple of snags. Now, here's the good news, is that we're actually going to go back to these conversations with Bard and ChatGPT, and we're going to go and see how we can, what I did, what I asked, how it interpreted what I was talking about, and what we can do better moving forward. All right. So the first thing that I did was I posted this on Google Bard, and one of the reasons why I use Google Bard versus GPT is because while GPT understands what you're asking a lot better and provides detailed outputs that I'm very, very fond of, GPT's knowledge base sort of ends at September 2021. So if I want to now ask GPT to provide me best practices based on what we, standards, JavaScript standards at the end of 2022, I don't know if GPT is going to give me what I'm looking for. Whereas Google Bard it kind of learns in a slightly different way, and it seems to be a little bit more updated. It understands the latest versions of Node and the latest versions of React and the latest versions of JavaScript, and can provide a lot more insight into how we should be coding in JavaScript and how we should be creating React components. Having said that, though, once again, GPT seems to be able to create a better practice of certain things. And I prefer GPT. It's just that if I want to use React 18 and GPT only understands React 17, I might be missing out on a lot, just as an example. So even though it's giving me the best practices, it's giving me the best practice of something that is relatively old. So that is why I bounce between Google Bard and ChatGPT. I do have the pro version of GPT, which means that I could easily jump into GPT-4, but for the purposes of these live coding sessions, I use GPT 3.5 and Google Bard because they are free to use. Otherwise, we'd be using Copilot and GPT-4, but unfortunately, one has to pay for them. Okay, so just to give a little bit of context on some of the decisions that I've made. So coming back to this, I started with Bard and I wrote over here, I want to create a randomized function using JavaScript. Now, remember, we've got to create context and you've got to create, it's got to sort of pick out entities. So it's going to understand the intent and it's got to pick out entities of what it is that it has to go back now and go and sort of learn and or go and figure out and then deliver to us. So creating a randomized function using JavaScript that takes a string, array, or object and returns X random results back to me. So unlike normal randomizers where I will always, a person will always only ever sort of give it one thing. In this case, I want to be able to pass it either a string of comma separated values or a string of values separated by something else. And it must know how to separate, convert it into an array, and then return those randomized values back to me. So by explaining this, I've already made it a little bit more challenging for Google Bard now because I'm creating these sort of variable inputs now, and it has to now deliver like an output to me. Like, for example, and returns X random results. It's not only ever one random result. It's not, it could be one, it could be two, it could be three. So you already see that we can't just use a typical random function in JavaScript. We now need to actually build something that's quite more advanced. So, and I say over here now, and this is important, I also want to apply best practices and optimization. Now, I could have maybe added a little bit more context over there because I can't tell you that what Google Bard gave me was what I would regard as best practice and optimized coding, and more importantly, easy to read. But anyways, we'll deal with that later. What info do you require from me? Now, check what I did here. I ask it, what info do you require from me before providing me with recommended instructions on how to best approach the design of this randomized function? This is extremely important because you might think that you've given enough context, but as a fail-safe, ask AI, is there something else that you can provide it in order to better understand my requirement? Okay, and so by doing that, look at the response that I got. I like it. AI is always very positive. Sure, I can help you. Here is the information I need from you before providing recommended instructions on how to best approach the design. Okay, perfect. So now, what is the data type of the input? Is it a string, array, or object? And I kind of said it was all three. It could be all one of each. How many random results do you want to return? So even though I was providing this over here, saying that it takes a string, array, or object and returns X random results back to me, it wasn't confident about what it is that I was looking for. So now I needed to provide a lot more detail so that it could give me exactly what I want. Do you have any specific requirements for the randomness? It wanted to go into a little bit more advanced stuff. And then are there any performance requirements for the function? And I thought this was pretty cool. For my requirement, I wasn't really interested in sort of like, I wasn't really caring too much whether it was performant or not, because my particular requirement will only ever have a couple of hundred entries in the array. So I wasn't really too worried. But the fact that it asked that question, suddenly I was like, yes, there should be a switch to say, okay, if I had to choose between performing a performant piece of code because it's got to loop through 30,000 entries versus how genuine the random results are, well, now I can at least provide pass that as a parameter, and it will decide how to generate this random result, because it knows now that it has to be a lot more performant and it has to prioritize performance over randomness. Okay. Anyway, so it says over here, once it has this information, it can recommend sort of a design moving forward. It even shows some general best practices for designing a random function. I can't tell you that I really took a lot from this. It's like use math.random, use loops, use hash tables. That wasn't really helpful. So some optimizations. At this point, I'm more focused on saying, okay, well, why don't you write me this code? Because I don't have the time to now have to go and figure this stuff out and write it myself, right? This is what AI can now do for us. It's going to save us a lot of time as developers, because what our biggest problem is, we know what we want. We understand. If you're a good developer, you know what you want. You understand what you need to build. The problem, though, is you need to now go and write that code, which takes hours. So the idea over here is that you can use AI in order to do a lot of this tedious work for you. All right. So that's why I completely bypassed this whole section and just sort of moved on. Now, notice how I answered the questions. I made it as a list. Now, I would have preferred if it used numbers. GPT uses numbers instead of bullet points. And what's nice is that I can actually connect number to number. Whereas over here, I had to assume that it knew which bullet point I was referencing. Okay, so it still seemed to do a pretty good job, which is fine. So I said, if it's a string, we need to provide it's a separator that it uses to split the string into array and then randomize. Now I've given it a lot more context about what happens when it's a string. If it's an array, simply return X random entries. If it's an object, randomly loop through and select the prop values from the key props. Okay, so all of that is good. If I go here, we need to provide the function the amount of results to return, but one should be default if nothing is provided. So again, like it was asking us, where is it? How many random results do you want to return? So I'm answering that question and I'm providing as much detail as possible. Okay. We even need an option to tell the function to randomize per performance or for genuine randomness. Very good. We need to allow for duplicate results. This was kind of important. And this, I got a big lesson to teach over here because I trusted AI a little bit too much and landed up trying to use AI to troubleshoot functionality that wasn't necessarily a problem, and I lost over an hour on that, and it's all in the first episode, which you can once again go to by going to bit.ly/BC-episode 1. So anyways, and then once again I ask, are there any questions you have before designing this function? All right, so the answer was no. According to Bard, it had all the info that it needed. Good for him. Based on your requirements, I can design a randomized function that meets your needs. Here is the function. So I was kind of happy with this. It was providing sort of comments on what we're doing. It was, yes, the parameters. It understood that correctly. So there's the input, the separator, X. I mean, when I said X amount of results, at least it could have just given us a better variable. But anyways, performance, which is a Boolean, and duplicates, which is a Boolean as well. So I was very happy with that. Then it checks to see if it's a string and then it splits it. Very good. It checks to see if it's an object and then it does a object.values input. Now, create an array of the object's property values. So I didn't actually even realize what this does. I don't know if I've ever used it, to be honest, but it seems to, we have yet to test it, because if we go back here, we can see that pass an array and pass an object still needs testing. So right now, I'm still trusting what Bard's doing over there. This over here, set the default value for X. If X is the same as undefined, then X is equal to 1. Now, funny enough, either Google Bard lost the context of providing optimized and production-ready logic, or it just doesn't know it doesn't know what to do when it comes to those kind of best practices. Okay, because for example, you couldn't, this over here, if X is equal to undefined, X is equal to 1, using more modern practices, you could have actually just said over here, X is equal to 1. And if null or undefined comes in over here to this prop, then the default value would be 1. Why go and write this? This is a terrible practice. Okay, so either it lost context of me asking for best practice approaches, or it just lost, or it actually doesn't know how to, or how can I say? I'm losing my words over here. It's like non-biased to a certain methodology, like it's like whatever. You might best practices are relative, right? And it doesn't sort of try to choose. I don't know. Anyway, so if we go down as well, again, this if performance is the same as true. Now, I know, remember, 3 equal signs very different to 2 equal signs, because 3 equal signs will compare not only the values but the data types as well. Now, I'm happy about that, but a modern practice is to not even have that part over there and just reference this knowing that it's a Boolean. So it should have just said if performance. Anyway, then it does this shuffle. Now, this is where the nightmare came in initially. But we'll leave that to bake for now. And then, yeah, if we don't want to use performance and we rather want to be more genuine about the randomness, then this is the alternative, which does this math dot or input dot map and the math dot for math and random, and off you go. So I'm happy with that. If it's duplicates, and I think this is nice. If it's duplicates, all it's doing is it's already shuffled the array. So it's already kind of randomized it, and then it just grabs the first X amount of values from the array and then gives it back to you. So I like that. That was pretty cool. Otherwise, if we need to remove duplicates from items, then it does this instead. Now, this is where the nightmare came in. All right. So the first problem that I have with this logic was that number one, input.shuffle. It tries to use an array.prototype.shuffle. Now, I was testing this in Chrome, and I'm using a pretty recent version of Chrome, yet it wasn't working. And no matter what I tried to do, I couldn't get it to work. And it finally, GPT pointed out that there could be a case where a lot of some of the browsers do not support the .shuffle. And it would surprise me that Chrome is one of them, but there must have been something that was missed. And so I had to use AI to sort of give me the shuffle alternative. Okay, so that was the first one that came that I had to now sort of work with. So what was the lesson to learn from this? The lesson was, it was one thing to say that I'm using JavaScript and I want to create a function. But in order to provide a little bit more involved context, I should have maybe said what version of JavaScript I'd like to be using, number one. And number two, the browsers, that it is in fact not a Node.js application. It could have assumed that I was writing a Node app, okay? And the Node app, things like this were possible. It's because we're using server side and Node itself. But now in the browser, we're at the mercy of the browser's web engines, and JavaScript engines. Sorry. So we've got to be careful we've got to be more specific. And I wasn't specific. I didn't say which environment this was on. Okay. I mean, I should have even said that it needs to work on Chrome, Edge. It's got to work on whatever, it's got to work on all these browsers, because then it would have provided me with something that would have been legit all the way. So that was the first mistake that I made, was I didn't give enough context about where this JavaScript logic is going to be running. All right. The second one, and this hurt a lot, and I found myself going into an infinite loop with both Bard and GPT, where I kept on coming back and saying the following code, and I would paste the code, is giving me a infinite loop, or it's only returning 2 results intermittently. And most of the time it returns 3, but now and then it returns 2, and I cannot find the reason for it. And then I would keep pasting this code. And now the problem is that the language learning module, or AI in Bard, or GPT in Bard, sorry, they're very positive. They're very, very optimistic. Their glass is half full. So every time you go and say this is an error, then what they do is like, okay, no worries, apologies. Let me give you a different version of this and see if that's going to help. And then I would take that different version and boom, a new error occurs. And then I would go back and I would say, okay, this is a problem now. You fixed the one, but now you've caused the other. Okay, cool. And then it apologizes and it comes back and it says, yeah, you go. Here's another one. And I would go and try that out. Now, here's the actual issue. And it came here to the top. When I said, where was it? When I said we need to allow for duplicate results by passing a Boolean param to the function. By saying that, I was trying to tell GPT that I don't want 3 results back where 2 of the results are the same. Now, there's 2 problems with this. Number one, nowhere over here was I saying that it must make sure that when it determines duplication, do we incorporate case sensitivity or not? Okay, that was the first thing. So I had a huge session where I was trying to have Bard rewrite the logic so that it's case insensitive when it's trying to determine duplications in the results. But the bigger issue is that when I said we need to duplicate or determine if we want duplicate results back or not, when I said that, I didn't state when it should occur in the code. This is all I gave it. And from there, it went and wrote the function. I trusted that most of the functions should be legit, and the tests were 80% correct, and with a few little tweaks, it felt as if everything was working. And at some point, I honestly thought that maybe it had something to do with CodePen. And so what I did was I actually grabbed all of this and I threw it into VS Code, and I was running it using Node on offline. And lo and behold, I was getting the same error. So apologies, CodePen. And so if coming back to this, the point that I'm trying to make over here is that it wasn't enough for me to now go and say that I need to have a Boolean prop that says you are allowed or not allowed to return duplicate results back to me. So if you are allowed, off you go. And that was working like a bomb. But the moment I switched off and said, listen, I do not want duplicate results back, that is where I started getting intermittent results. And the long story short is that its logic, the function that it created over here, was working fine, okay, for the most part. This is actually a little bit outdated, but it was working. It was doing what it needed to do. The problem was that it was doing it at the wrong time. And the reason for that is because it should have first determined duplicate values, removed them, and then given me X results back. Whereas what it was doing is it was first shuffling and returning X results, 3 results, and then removing the duplications. So that is why I was getting intermittent values back. Like, for example, when I was expecting 3 values back, I was getting 2 in some cases. And it's because it was first generating the list of 3 and then determining duplication checks and removing them as and when needed. I spent over an hour. And the reason for that, the reason for spending so much time is that I kept on thinking. I used console logs to pinpoint where the problem was, and I kept on thinking that maybe, just maybe, I didn't ask it something right, and I kept on fixating on 3 or 4 lines of code in order to see if I could get this value working. And because I never provided AI the context of when the duplication checks must occur versus when it must return X values, it had no idea what I was struggling with. It couldn't figure out what I was struggling with. And every time I told it that this code is not working, it's only returning 2 intermittently, then it just goes and rewrites the code into another format. And then when I do that again, and I say, okay, but now you're doing an infinite loop, then it just goes and writes the code again into a different format, thinking that it's solving the problem. Okay, very optimistic. It's always thinking that it's solving the problem. But when in fact, it just didn't realize that I first wanted to remove the duplicates and then return the final results back. Okay, so it was my fault. I needed to be specific, not only what kind of functionality is required over here, but when and what is the order of the functionality that we are needing for this particular function to run. All right, so these were some of the crazy lessons that I had to sort of take away from the first episode. And by all means, once again, go to the first episode. I'll show it you on the screen. There we go. Watch episode 1 on YouTube. And you will be able to go and see the nightmare that I faced, because it was one thing to provide context, but it was another to understand the order of importance. It's not going to figure it out for you. There were too many variables. There were too many different scenarios. Now, having said all of that, I will say this as well. And the test cases, I had to have a good laugh. So this was the code that was written, and it's positive. It should meet all of your requirements. Let me go zoom again. Sorry. Okay, so this was the logic that it wrote, and it was happy. And then I asked it, create 2 unique test cases where a string will be passed to the function. Now, again, I didn't give it enough context because I actually wanted it to write out the function. And what I like about GPT is that GPT assumed that I actually wanted the function as well. But over here, it says, okay, test case 1, provide this as an input string with a space separator, return 2 values and set it for performance and is true and allowing the duplicates. Expected output. So now this got me very confused because I was like, how did you get to this? If you are using a string separator, how are we getting to this particular issue? And I don't know if I'm misunderstanding. But if it says expected output, then yes, this is the expected, or no, this is not the expected output because it should be an array of 4 values. This is a string. Anyway, so this is completely wrong. But even the second test case is completely wrong. The input says this is a string with a separator. Then the separator is a hyphen. It wants 3 values back. We switch off performance, switch off duplicates. And this over here, it's switching off duplicates, but there's nothing in here that is in fact, oh, sorry, I'm wrong. There is a duplicate, okay? So it shouldn't have even, this is confusing. So the problem over here is because the separator was a hyphen, the result would have been an entire string. This would have been in the array as one result because there was no separator. And I literally tested this with its own function that it provided above, and it was failing. It was not failing, but it was not providing these outcomes. It was providing outcomes that we all know it would provide. Okay, so I don't know what happened over here, but I definitely want to just submit that response back to Google over there because that didn't go right. So I wrote this here. When running the function using your first test case, I received the following error. The shuffle is not a function. This is where that shuffle came in now. And it was convinced that I was passing a string. So it kept on saying the function will throw an error if the input is a string because the shuffle method only defines for array. So it seemed to have lost the context of its own function that it created, where it does in fact split the string into an array. So, and I think this is important. With Google Bard, it doesn't handle context too well. It loses. It doesn't. I wouldn't say that it loses context over time, or it loses context as you converse with it. But more important, I think what's happening is it doesn't know exactly what it gave you. That's how it feels. It doesn't know exactly what it gave you, and I think this is where GPT shines. I'll even show you an example on GPT where there was, allow me just to find it. Oh, by the way, so I said over here, using the following function. So I copied and pasted this whole randomized thing that was generated by Bard. And I said, which create 2 test cases that should the input be a string. So it was the same thing that I asked Google Bard, create 2 test cases. And the only difference is Google Bard wrote the logic where I had to copy and paste it over here for GPT because it had no context of the function that ran. Okay. But this is what I was expecting. This is my test case. I wanted to be able to copy and paste this. Whereas if we go back to Bard, Bard's like, no, here we go. Here's your test cases. So GPT understands where you're coming from a lot better than what Bard is understanding. Okay, if that makes sense. So anyways, I enjoyed this. It explained it. Off we go. There's the second test case. Okay, good. And I was happy with that. Now, this is also where I started getting an issue. So I said, if we set test case and set the performance to false, we're receiving random indexes of the array instead of the values. Now, I kept on thinking that this was the input.map, and this is where things went wonky. And it tried to rewrite the logic. Okay, good. And it tried to explain what it did. And then it updated the test case. How cool is that? Okay, anyway. But then I said, the function you provide is now returning the actual values and not the indexes, but it is returning 2 values instead of 3. Here comes that whole duplication check. But this is the response that I got from GPT. And I think because of this response, I kept on thinking that maybe GPT did in fact make the problem or cause the issue and that it was rectifying itself. So as you can see over here, apologies for the confusion. It seems there was an error in the code snippet I provided. To ensure that randomized function returns the correct number of values when the performance is set to false, we need to modify the code further. Here's the updated code. So it kept on changing it. But you see, this is where I went off the path here, because it seems there was an error in the code snippet I provided. So I was being led down the wrong path. There was no error in the code. The problem was my logic and the order of the logic that I gave it. So there was nothing wrong with the code, but it thought that there was. It's always like giving you the benefit of the doubt. And it actually threw me off completely. And I spent over an hour trying to figure out what was going on. So when you see something like where it says there was an error in the code I provided, take it with a pinch of salt. Go back and double check. Did you ask the right questions? Okay. Did you provide enough context? Did you give the order of the business logic or the advanced logic that needs to be that needs to exist inside this function before, especially if, because I will say this, the chances that it got it wrong the first time are either because you didn't give it enough context or because either it's because you didn't give enough context or I don't know, in some rare case. So having seen these errors, I have yet to receive an error or an incorrect code snippet from AI. Now, Bard is another story. Because it loses context, it's a problem. But anyways, GPT seems to be doing great. So I would always say use GPT if you can use it. For example, if you're working with general coding practices and standards and doing JavaScript and stuff like that, it's safe to use GPT because it might not know some of the new features, but for the most part, it knows exactly what you would want to do. Bard might know the later features, but it just doesn't seem to handle context and handle a conversation well enough at the moment. And I mean, I'm using GPT-3, so there's no excuse. Okay, even though I have GPT-4, I'm using 3 over here. I would love to use 4, but for this live stream, I didn't want to use something that's paid. Anyway, so coming back over here. Yeah, the shuffle, yeah. It takes into account the option to disallow duplicate values. The updated function, yes, that's fine. So I think all in all, I don't want to go on too much. I think I've created enough, a couple of lessons, enough lessons over here. It's been half an hour. I don't know if there are any questions at the moment. I'll quickly jump onto the various streams just to see if there are questions, because I am streaming to 5 platforms. Hold on a moment. What we'll do is we'll just put a picture to that. Okay. We seem to be okay. We seem to be doing all right. So, okay. No, I think we're okay. There's not really any questions. So what I'd like to do is just end off the second episode. I'd love to know what you all think. If you are watching this as a replay, I do provide subtitles. Just give me a little bit of time. It won't be available immediately, but it will be available relatively soon. And that will allow you to navigate these sessions a little bit easier. Please feel free to comment, like, subscribe, join, send me questions. I would love to be able to interact with those questions. And then what I'll do is in the next episode, I'll actually review some of those questions and then move forward with the next episode. So with all that being said, thank you everyone very, very much for being a part of this session. I hope you are enjoying this podcast. And until next time, cheers.